The thrust of the argument here, for one, is that the shooter claims to be a non-binary. Don't care, didn't ask. It has literally no bearing on the facts of the case at hand. It changes literally nothing, and the only reason it's in any way relevant to this case is very clearly, in my opinion, because the shooter is trying to obfuscate away from hate crime charges. It is not lost on me that the entirety of the right wing, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, Tucker Carlson, everybody on the right has literally never even so much as believed that non-binary identity exists at all. They don't think it does. They think people are mentally ill if they identify as non-binary. But now, all of a sudden, because the gay bar shooter, who just now from behind bars has decided to identify this way, that somehow stops this from being motivated by hate after everything that we have just seen is ludicrous. So I just wanted to record this hopefully very quick segment about the Colorado Springs shooter. As it turns out, there's been some developments in the story, one of which the right wing is very, very excited about, perhaps even frothing at the mouth, salivating a little bit. Turns out, this is from Aaron Reed. The AP is reporting that the Colorado shooting is being charged as a hate crime. This confirms what we all knew, that anti-LGBTQ sentiment motivated this murderer. People like Shia Raichik from Libs of TikTok, Matt Walsh, Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, etc. all have blame for spreading anti-LGBTQ hate, and I've already made the case for this in the previous video about Colorado. So you got AP, Colorado LGBTQ bar shooting suspect facing murder hate crime charges. So makes sense to me. You know, you go to a gay bar and you shoot it up while apparently screaming homophobic slurs while you were there. I think it's a good, amount of evidence to be made that this is probably motivated by hate, maybe. Now, much the same way that, the Buffalo shooter specifically went to a predominantly black grocery store that people knew about. And also, previously, in his media diet, expressed sympathies for the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. Pretty sure that one was also motivated by hate, specifically against black people. Anyway, turns out right-wingers have got a new rhetorical strategy they're trying to trot out, which is actually not new, and we've seen it really recently. Turns out the public defenders have filed in their defense that apparently the shooter identifies as non-binary. So this is from Alejandro Caraballo. Full following for the defense of the shooter. The footnote states that the shooter is non-binary. It came with an motion to unseal the arrest affidavit, which is still sealed. We have no details from the prosecution. The defense counsel argues that the lack of access to the arrest affidavit and other prosecution materials is detrimental to the defendant's right to effective counsel. They are correct. They cannot adequately prepare a defense without knowing the official basis of the charges. We have an information vacuum created by the prosecution's decision to seal the arrest affidavit. The first substantive filing is from the defense, which notes the non-binary identification. We have no idea if it's been a consistent identification or a troll by the defendant, but we do have an idea, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Also, journalists, please include links and tweets regarding core filings. Not everyone knows that unique docket portals have been created outside of the typical docket search. This case is ripe for disinformation, as we will see, and we need full information to verify statements made. So, of course, now that this is happening, now that, the shooter apparently is identifying as non-binary, everybody on the right seems to be really excited about this, seems to be really interested in defending the mass shooter against claims that this was an attack motivated by hate. There are many reasons that they're doing this, but I think the biggest responses, you might be asking, Conure, you identify as non-binary. What do you think about, the shooter, you said it was probably motivated by hate. Well, now they're non-binary. Does that mean that it's still motivated by hate? Yes. The actual answer to the shooter identifies as non-binary is, why do I care? And I didn't ask. The simple answer being that you can still be a member of a marginalized group and hate that marginalized group. Commit hate crimes against that marginalized group. Spout hateful rhetoric about that marginalized group. If you couldn't, then I guess Blaire White is a cis woman now, even though she identifies as a trans woman, because the majority of her rhetoric is anti-trans. I guess Candace Owens is white now, because the majority of her rhetoric is anti-black. I guess Dave Rubin is a straight man now, because the majority of his rhetoric when it comes to gay people, queer people broadly, is anti-queer. So I have to let you know, the right wing is very, very excited to affirm the marginalized identities of Candace Owens, Dave Rubin, Blaire White, when it is convenient for them. Anytime you attack them for being anti the marginalized group they happen to also be a part of, they're very excited to be like, oh my God, you think Candace Owens is racist, but she's black, right? They're very excited to do that. But whenever anybody else talks about, okay, well, I'm a victim of said hatred because I happen to be part of this marginalized group, it's like, oh, no, well, it can't possibly because of that. Your identity, it doesn't matter. Why are you playing identity politics? Nobody cares that the shooter claims to be non-binary. Literally nobody cares, and it doesn't matter. That's the easy answer. And here's even more proof of that. If it was the case that simply by being a part of a marginalized group made it that it was now impossible for you to do hatred against that group, well, then this neo-Nazi that recently went on Tucker Carlson after the shooting, espousing genocidal rhetoric, would suddenly be a straight woman, but she identifies as a lesbian. So this is Jaimee Michell, a literal documented neo-Nazi from the Gays Against Groomers Twitter account, which is just a hate account, went on Tucker Carlson after the shooting to deliver these really choice remarks. You know, a real big ally of the queer community, Jaimee Michell.
Right. I mean, it shouldn't have to be said, but what is anti-LGBTQ that these people need to understand, and what is putting our community in great danger is, claiming that all of us support this and just associating all of us with this.
So all of us, meaning that Jaimee Michell identifies as a gay woman, I would imagine, or just gay, right?
You know, saying that groomer is an anti-LGBTQ slur, that is doing irreparable damage to us as a whole, and is putting a really large target on our backs. And unfortunately...
Yeah, but who was the one who started calling everybody groomers for simply being gay? Who was the one that did that? If you were worried about the term groomer being watered down, which they're not because they don't care about the safety of children, we've been through this. If you were worried about you yourself as a lesbian woman being caught under the umbrella of groomer because of other people that you accuse of being with zero evidence, zero convictions, zero actual, anything based in reality to support that claim, then suddenly you're a straight woman. Because you're literally espousing hateful rhetoric against queer people while being queer yourself. You're not gay anymore. You're straight now. By the logic of, suddenly because the shooter identifies as non-binary behind bars after the shooting, when he has a documented history of being homophobic, queerphobic broadly, that makes it suddenly not a hate attack is ludicrous. And now you're a straight woman. And just listen to it for yourself.
Irreparable damage to us as a whole, and is putting a really large target on our backs. And unfortunately, the tragedy that happened in Colorado Springs the other night, it was expected and predictable. We all, within Gays Against Groomers, saw this coming from a mile away. Yeah. And sadly, I don't think it's going to stop until we end this evil agenda that is attacking children.
So she said that I don't think these mass shootings are going to stop against queer people until we end this so-called, quote-unquote, evil agenda against grooming children or whatever. Source, you got an evidence for that? You have literally any evidence at all for any of the charges of crimes you're making against people simply living their lives? You don't, and you never have. There never has been any. There is an abundance of evidence that we've shown in previous videos of, let's say, the Catholic Church. Christians, white, heterosexual, straight, religious men are the average child abuser. There is so much evidence to that fact, but you never bring it up. You never talk about it. You always make slanderous claims that all queer people and their allies are groomers with no evidence to back it up, because there isn't any. Because it doesn't actually matter to you. You don't care about the safety of children. You just don't want queer people to exist, which is kind of interesting considering you yourself, Jaimee Michell, neo-Nazi, are a queer person. So clearly, it is entirely possible to use hateful rhetoric to weaponize hate against a marginalized identity that you happen to be a member of. And if you're wondering, what is this documented history from the shooter being homophobic, queerphobic, that you speak of, Conure? Surely you don't have any receipts for that. It turns out I've got a lot of them. So this is the shooter's dad, who I will preface by saying is not seemingly very mentally well, but that doesn't excuse anything he's about to say. That is just a side note that I know the right will bring up, because they're also saying that about the shooter. And it's probably true about the shooter. But mentally ill people don't just go out and commit mass shootings out of nowhere. That doesn't happen. There are motivations that these people have, and will even cite in their own manifestos, that they then go and do their crimes with the motivation of. Don't be foolish. So this recently came out today as a time of recording on November 23rd. This was posted by Brian Taylor Cohen on Twitter from News 8, CBS News. So we're just going to watch it and listen. I'm just going to watch and listen. So this is the father of the shooter, the person who raised this shooter.
There was a shooting involving, multiple people. Right. And then later on, to find that it's a gay bar. Yeah, right. And
I was like, oh my God, is he gay? I was scared. Oh my God, shit, is he gay? And he's not gay, so it's like this.
Well, you guys had.
So if you didn't catch that, the father of the shooter, he's being told by people, they're like, yo, your son shot up a gay bar, killed 5 people. And his immediate response is not, oh my God, that's horrible. Why did he do this? That's terrible. That's not the son I raised. Instead, he's like, oh my God, it was a gay bar. Is he gay? Is he gay? Is he gay? Is he gay? That would be terrible if my son was gay. Why is he at a gay bar? Oh, he shot it up. Oh, whew, thank God that he's not gay. So clearly this guy, this father of the shooter, doesn't have a favorable view of queer people. But we'll let him continue.
Conversations about that. You were.
Oh yeah,
you
I was
told
adamant.
him. Yeah, you were adamant that gay is
this ain't
bad.
happening. I'm a Mormon. I'm a conservative Republican. And
so he's a Mormon, and also the Church of Latter-day Saints actually confirmed that the shooter was on their rolls. He was a part of that church. Now, apparently it wasn't for any very long length of time, but he was present there. And his father's a Mormon, so there you go. The Church of Latter-day Saints, by the way, not necessarily free of scandal when it comes to the abuse of kids.
We don't do gay. Gay. We don't do gay.
Yeah.
I can't get answers from the attorneys really, but they're saying that some of these, it's involving a gay bar or some shit. I don't know. I don't know what the heck he did if you have a gay bar. I don't know what's going on.
Well, he's accused of going on a mass shooting at a gay bar and killing 5 people.
Colorado.
Okay, well, that's shit. If he's accused of doing that, I'm glad he's not gay.
He said, I'm just glad he's not gay.
I'm glad he's not gay.
There's more, if you thought that was bad enough. And there's also more receipts, not just the words of the father here. Another clip from the same interview.
I praised him for violent behavior really early. I still say that it works. It's instant, and you'll get immediate results.
So, while being interviewed about his son, who just recently did a mass shooting at a gay bar and is behind bars for it, he is now telling the reporters that the father praised the son for violent behavior and taught him very early on that it's immediate and you get quick results for it. So, there is a culture of violence being instilled in this child from his own father as he's being raised. Surely that might have something to do with the fact that this is not the first time this shooter has been in trouble with the law over violent offenses.
And you'll always give what you want if you're good at fighting.
Had you taught him more tolerance, let me be direct. Do you think, he would have been more tolerant of gay people? Apparently. I
think that my anti-gay, anti-Semitic, they call it conservative writing. I'm a conservative extraordinaire, and I've been very vocal about that. I support Randy Voepel, his grandpa. I love Randy Voepel. He's a good American.
So in the last video, we talked about Randy Voepel, who is the California Republican, who is the grandfather of the shooter. So this is the shooter's dad. This is the shooter's dad's dad, Randy Voepel, the shooter's grandfather. Now, when we talked about in the last video that the shooter actually got charged with multiple felonies, and then that case eventually dropped and he didn't actually get prosecuted for any of them, much less convicted, the fact that he has very strong connections to a politician in a seat of power is quite curious. Now, we have no way to know if there's any direct relation there, but I think reasonable people could come to the assumption that felony charges don't just randomly get dropped. If the FBI is involved in a situation where there are felony charges in any capacity, those charges are usually going to go to court and a person's going to be prosecuted. Now, they could be acquitted of the charges, but that didn't happen because there was no trial. There was no prosecution.
President someday.
Randy who?
Randy Voepel.
Randy Voepel. Randy.
That's a good man right there. That's the best man for the job. It was okay to be gay. It's like he says, now it's like it's cool to be gay. It's not. I think it's not cool at all. I think it's my opinion about gays is that it's just not okay. I think we should stand up against homosexuality.
So the shooter's own father is very clearly homophobic, not a fan of the gays. He literally talks about his own anti-gay rhetoric. So if he's teaching his child to be violent early on and also teaching his child to be anti-gay early on, the fact that the shooter went and shot up an LGBTQ bar in the current climate and hysteria around queer people when there was a drag performance that night and a drag brunch, it's clearly to any reasonable, rational person that there is a high likelihood of this attack being motivated by anti-LGBTQ hate. You'd literally have to be denying the evidence of your eyes and ears to come to such an assumption. But there's more. So, maybe you don't trust the words of this clearly coked out father of the shooter, who still seems to be pretty coherent in his thought processes. In this, let's find out a little bit more. So here's a video of when he was arrested. The shooter was arrested in 2021, which we'll have more of on that story in a second. The shooter calls himself your boy in a video and arrested in 2021. He uses homophobic slurs often, according to his neighbor, quote, in a very hateful way. His last minute parting shot claiming he's non-binary is not in good faith. This proves he's one of Matt Walsh's own. So we actually have more on that story. So this is from KKTV, which is a Colorado Springs CBS affiliated news program, talking about the arrest records of the shooter in 2021 that mentioned that he apparently planned to commit a mass shooting. Those charges were never followed through on.
The man told his family that he wanted to be the next mass killer. Sources confirmed to us the man in those arrest papers is the same man as the accused Club Q gunman. As we've been reporting, investigators will not confirm if the accused gunman is tied to an arrest of a man with the exact same name and the exact same birthday back in the summer of 2021, because that old case is not showing up in public court records. His mugshot in this case has not yet been released. 11 News reporter Natalie Devereaux is joining us live in studio. Natalie, these court records appear to be sealed.
Yes, when we search for them in the court records, nothing comes up, not even that Anderson Lee Aldrich was arrested. We're told the case may have been dismissed and the records then sealed, but we have those papers, and in them, it references mass shooting in connection to the suspect 5 times.
In
this 3-page arrest affidavit from 2021, investigators say Anderson Lee Aldrich told his grandparents he had planned to carry out a mass shooting 18 months ago, almost exactly to the date of the Club Q shooting. These arrest papers say deputies were called out to a house off Mark Sheffel and Fontaine. This is video from that day. Sources tell us Aldrich lived with his grandparents. The papers say after they told him they sold the house, he held them at gunpoint. Aldrich reportedly told them they couldn't move because, quote, it would interfere with his plans to conduct a mass shooting and bombing. The court documents also say Aldrich's grandparents told authorities they lived in fear because of their grandson's homicidal threats, going on to say Aldrich told them he was going to be the next mass killer and had bragged about, quote, wanting to go out in a blaze.
So, as it would turn out, any right-winger telling you that this was just a lone wolf, it was a random, spontaneous event that just so happened to happen, who could have known how it happened? Clearly not. You should believe the evidence of your eyes and ears. They don't want you to, but this dude was literally planning mass shootings in the past, has a documented history of homophobia. His father tried to instill homophobic beliefs and violent beliefs in him by his own admission. The prosecution never went forward with the charges, and now 5 people and multiple others have paid the price for that. Because if this person was actually prosecuted and hopefully convicted in this case, he may not have been in a position to do it in Colorado Springs at the Club Q bar. So this is not a spontaneous event. It's not clear if there is a direct connection between the Club Q shooting and this potential shooting that never actually happened at this time in 2021, but it's clear that there is a pattern of behavior here. That this mass shooting was not spontaneous and that he suddenly decided to do it because he's had thoughts of doing it in the past. It wasn't just like a spur of the moment crime of passion. More from Alejandro Caraballo, all indications from people who knew the shooter were that he was violent and homophobic. The identification of non-binary is almost certainly a troll. From the Daily Piece, gun-crazed Colorado club shooting suspect used anti-gay slurs, neighbor says. Quote, there would be times where he and his mom would get into fights, arguments, because he would be saying hateful things about whoever he was angry with. He said things sometimes that probably should have been alarming to me. He used the term, the F slur, a lot. Most of the time it came from a place of anger. Shocker. So the thrust of the argument here, for one, is that the shooter claims to be a non-binary. Don't care, didn't ask. It has literally no bearing on the facts of the case at hand. It changes literally nothing, and the only reason it's in any way relevant to this case is very clearly, in my opinion, because the shooter is trying to obfuscate away from hate crime charges. So it is not lost on me that the entirety of the right wing, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, Tucker Carlson, everybody on the right, has literally never even so much as believed that non-binary identity exists at all. They don't think it does. They think people are mentally ill if they identify as non-binary, right? But now, all of a sudden, because the gay bar shooter, who just now from behind bars has decided to identify this way, that somehow stops this from being motivated by hate, after everything that we have just seen, is ludicrous. And the reason why they're talking about this in this way is because it's very helpful for them to provide cover for the mass shooter. So, the final point that we have to make here before we get into some absolute fucking insane lunatics on the right talking about it, which we will get to, stay tuned for that, is something I want to make very clear for people. The conservatives in the United States of America and around the world, but specifically in the context of the United States, given the amount of guns that are in this country, have successfully set up a support system for right-wing extremists so that they can go out and do acts of domestic terror, but one that shields them from any implication for the parties or people with that shared ideology who use that same violent rhetoric, who believe the same things, and also happen to get cited in manifestos and come up in the media diets of the shooters after the fact. They have successfully set up a system where they can tacitly, implicitly advocate for violence against groups they don't like, in this case, queer people, in the past and still ongoing in the present, black and brown people, literally anybody that isn't exactly like them, in most cases, wealthy white people, create a climate of fear and hatred and disgust around said minority groups, and then get people so whipped up in a frenzy that they go out and do something about it. Right? Tucker Carlson, who said somebody has to do something about this. Seems like the Colorado Springs shooter might have taken that into account in some capacity. This is not to say that there was any quid pro quo that Tucker Carlson, Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, whoever else, literally told the shooter to go out and do it, because that's not what I'm saying. That would be a ludicrous charge. But what I am saying is that they create the conditions that provoke people into thinking that might be an idea to do in the first place, right? By calling everybody on the left, all queer people and their allies, groomers, accusing them of some of the worst crimes possible, that they are abusing children, with zero evidence, ever, the idea that that wouldn't bring people to be like, okay, well, if the cops aren't going to do anything about it, if the politicians aren't going to do anything about it, maybe I should take it into my own hands. That's what people like the Colorado shooter end up thinking, in my estimation. So all of that is what leads to this. Once again, I'm tapping the sign. Domestic extremist-related killings in the U.S. by perpetrator affiliation from 2012 to 2021. Over the last decade, right-wing extremists have been responsible for the great majority of extremist-related murders. Right-wing extremists account for 75% of all extremist-related killings in the United States of America for the last 10 years. That's 95% if you include the domestic Islamist extremists, which are also right-wing. Contrary to this, left-wing extremists apparently only account for 4%, which is an infinitesimally small compared to the 95% of right-wing extremists. 73% of those deaths are committed by white supremacists. You know, the same people that happen to follow Tucker Carlson, that happen to follow Ben Shapiro, that happen to follow Matt Walsh, Laura Ingraham, Candace Owens, the same people that follow them on their social medias, watch their programs on TV, their literal audience, share those same ideas and parrot those ideas, sometimes directly cite them in their manifestos. 73% of them are white supremacists. Like, the amount of times that a left-wing person will commit an act of violence predicated on their ideology is a drop in the bucket compared to the right. It's not to say that it's good, but it is a drop in the bucket. It's very clear that there is a problem on the right with this, and something has to be done about it in the ways that I've explained. You know, if they stop, if they come to their senses and realize that their words are leading to violence and hatred and mass shootings, maybe if they stopped and reassessed and understood that they don't have any evidence to support their bullshit claims, less people might get the idea that it's something that they should do. The left has no such shield whenever that happens either. Should a left-winger ever go out and commit that kind of a violent act, literally everybody on all sides, right-wingers, left-wingers, condemn the violence. Every time. You might see some people that are in support of it, but it's a drop in the bucket, clearly. So, because of that condemnation, because the left happen to have a bunch of decent people in it, less and less people do it because they know that they will face righteous condemnation for doing so. That's why right-wing extremists commit the grand majority of domestic terrorism in the United States over the last 10 years. The right rewards this behavior, and if they don't reward it, which they seem to be more bold about doing on the timeline as we'll see, they provide cover for it, which is what this so-called shooter was non-binary defense that we're going to see in a minute is about. The right wing creates a climate of fear and hate around the marginalized group that they don't want. They strip the people in their base of any support system that they would use to maturely process those emotions. For as much as they talk about mental illness when it comes to mass shootings, they never vote in favor of funding mental health services more, much less actual physical health care services. They always talk shit on cities, which are some of the most diverse places that allow for people to understand that people that are not like them, marginalized groups, are just people like everybody else, and also provide them outlets for socialization so that they're not, locked, secluded, and siloed away in their suburbs with nothing to do except hate people online. And they also allow them easy access to the weapons that they happen to use to do it. Now, I'm a pro-gun left-winger. I know it might be shocking to you, but I am pro-responsible gun ownership. The right does not advocate for responsible gun ownership. They the politicians and the pundits consistently advocate for and vote for the deregulation of firearms in this country. I support red flag laws, which, if were actually in place, with any teeth in Colorado, this shooter would have had to try a lot harder to get the weapon he used to commit the attack. And same with a bunch of other shooters in the past, like the Uvalde shooter. I support wait times for gun purchases because all of these policies don't stop people from being able to get firearms if they're good, law-abiding citizens who aren't a threat to anybody and just want them for home defense or for sport, but they stop the people who are more likely, more predisposed to do the crimes from actually getting the gun to commit it, which makes it so that they have to go through back alley third-party channels to get it, which will take them more time. Likely, some people might not even know how to do that, and then that stops them outright. 60% of mass shootings are committed by people with a history of domestic violence. If you understood that and in your red flag laws put that into effect, those red flag laws would then stop those people from getting the firearms and they would have to try a lot harder to do it. So given those conditions that the right has literally designed over a long period of time, once those right-wing sympathizers and those right-wing extremists go out and commit these heinous acts like in Colorado, the right-wing media provides cover after the blood spills, as we will see. Colorado should be all the proof you need of this. Uvalde should have been all the proof you need of this. The Pulse nightclub shooting. There are so many of these mass shootings in America, and every single time it's the same. If you cannot recognize that pattern, then you might be too far gone. But if you're watching this video, then hopefully you're not. So, of course, now we move on to the fun stuff really quick. We got Ben Shapiro here. After it turns out that the Colorado shooter from behind bars with no history otherwise, and actually an anti-queer history, has decided to identify as non-binary, likely just to troll the media and also provide people like Ben Shapiro the tools that he needs to obfuscate away from any hate crime charges, which then obfuscates any implication he might get for his violent and genocidal rhetoric against queer people, which we've documented on this channel in the past. He says, yesterday the media said it was the right's fault that a deranged person committed an act of evil. It turns out the person identifies as non-binary. So now they blame the right for bullying. They care about the narrative. The facts don't matter, just targeting their opponents, right? So suddenly Dave Rubin is straight now because, a gay person can't hate other gay people. Suddenly Candace Owens is white now because, a black person can't hate other black people. Suddenly the neo-Nazi that went on Tucker Carlson, Jaimee Michell, isn't a lesbian anymore because, of course, gay people can't hate other gay people. You're not as stupid as Ben Shapiro hopes you are. Here's Tim Pool, one of the boldest out there about it. He says, we shouldn't tolerate pedophiles grooming kids. So nobody's tolerating that, except for the Catholic Church, except for the majority of red states being the majority of states that allow for child marriage. Aside from the laws in those states that allow for child marriage, much less, the largest instances of child marriage happening. Unlike Matt Walsh, who recently in Unsurfaced video decided to pull over to the side of the road in transit. You can see in the video, we're not going to watch it here. You can see in the video, there are actually cars going in both ways. So he's literally on the side of the road in transit deciding to talk about how he's confused about consent generally and also confused about the age of consent for some reason. Also defends multiple pedophiles as well in the same breath. Clearly, the only people tolerate pedophiles grooming kids are people on the right, which includes Tim Pool. Tim Pool goes on to say, Club Q had a grooming event, no evidence. This is a charge that a crime has occurred, the grooming of children, which has no evidence. There's been no charges. There's been no convictions. It's not a grooming event, very clearly, just because queer people are present or drag queens are present. He goes on to say, how do you prevent the violence and stop the grooming? He's essentially saying, okay, well, if the police aren't doing anything about it, if the politicians aren't doing anything about it, well, how do you prevent the violence that he's charging with zero evidence is happening? How do you stop the grooming? He's literally saying the same thing that this neo-Nazi who went on Tucker Carlson is saying. that these mass shootings will continue to happen, they're saying, unless the left so-called, quote, stops grooming kids. They've never provided any evidence. They don't even use the term grooming correctly. Clearly, they don't actually care about it. It's just a nebulous, ever-changing charge of crimes with no evidence because they don't care about the abuse of children. Clearly, they don't. They just want to see queer people gone. They don't want queer people to exist. That's it. You have Matt Walsh as well. So this is the post-millennial, which is an absolute fucking rag. Breaking: Colorado club shooting suspect is non-binary, uses they, them pronouns, say attorneys. And you have Matt Walsh, and there it is. The reason the media wasn't giving us any actual details about this guy or his motive, it's because they wanted to set the narrative before the real truth came out. So no, that's not actually true. Usually when there is a person who's been accused of a crime and is in jail and potentially going to be prosecuted for it, the details are usually not going to be as succinct and expansive because that might interfere with the defense's ability to defend the perpetrator, or the accused, I should say. And it also could interfere with the ability of the people trying to convict the person who is accused. You can't like just give every detail out. Usually people withhold details until the trial actually happens. But Matt Walsh doesn't understand anything about anything except, and especially not apparently the age of consent. So once again, it doesn't matter. It's literally just so that people like Matt Walsh, Tim Pool, Ben Shapiro can go out in the media and provide cover for themselves from being implicated because of their own hateful rhetoric against gay people, and also provide cover for the shooter and potentially maybe influence the prosecution and stop them from going forward with the hate crime charges. Literally defending the shooter. You cannot say that, oh, well, of course, you know, because the shooter identifies as non-binary, well, suddenly that means he's a lefty, because non-binary people and queer people generally can't be right-wing, so Blaire White's a leftist now, I guess. Even though you're very excited to claim her as a right-winger whenever you want, because she's a trans woman. Suddenly you're disowning the shooter that you're also simultaneously defending and providing cover for. It's bullshit. If you want to see more about the Matt Walsh segment, I'm not going to cover it in this video right now. The Majority Report put a really good video out about it. Creepy video of Matt Walsh debating age of consent services. We'll add that into the links section of the description of this video if you want to go watch that. Highly recommend that you have. So clearly, I don't care that the shooter claims to be non-binary from behind bars at a jail cell with no history, and in fact, a history that contradicts it. To end, speaking of identity politics, Jillian Brenstetter, my oomfie, says on Twitter, something the right has become very adept at over the last decade is exploiting the naivete of liberal representational politics. The notion that 1, systemic violence doesn't exist, only individual malice, and thus 2, people of an identity group could never do harm to that group. Everything I've been talking about here. It's why so many of the CRT, critical race theory bans, specifically targeted any reference to the idea that racism is built into systems and people can be complicit in those systems without intention. They need people to believe hate only lives in hearts and minds rather than systems and institutions. This is what allows them to be like, oh my god, it was a lone wolf. It was just a lone gunman, a crazed maniac. There's no way that anything that I've described in this video could have contributed to the Colorado shooter going out and doing what he did. It was just because he's insane. He's just a hateful guy, or maybe even not, you know? A similar dynamic breeds a public debate where an individual mass shooter killing trans people is portrayed as a greater evil than bans on the healthcare trans people need to live, despite the fact that the latter would carry a much, much higher body count than the former. This is something I actually hadn't considered before until seeing this. So obviously the reason why the mass shooter killing trans people, while still terrible, still killing 5 queer people and injuring several others, it's still terrible, but the reason why the media focuses on it more is because it's more sensational. You know, if it bleeds, it leads in the media. Because it is violent, it's more eye-catching in the media, so they talk about it more. The very bureaucratic genocidal methods that people like Ron DeSantis in Florida, people like Governor Greg Abbott in Texas are trying to pursue to medically detransition all trans youth and all trans adults, because they've indicated intentions to do that as well. Marjorie Taylor Greene literally put forward a bill to do so. That doesn't get talked about as much because it's not as sensational, and because of what Jillian Brenstetter is talking about here when it comes to the naivete of liberal representational politics, that it's just individuals, not systems. This is why, unironically, CRT is very good, because it helps you understand that these slave owners of the past, for instance, you know, not everybody back then was a slave owner, but a lot of people provided cover for those slave owners, not because they were necessarily hateful on their own, but because the system reinforced that belief in them. So if you were able to change the system from reinforcing that belief, well, then suddenly you're able to cut away at the hatred and potentially stop slavery from existing, or the racism that occurred at the time and still does to this day from existing, right? Jillian Brentsetter goes on, if violence done by systems and laws is recognized as the greater evil, the representational games the right is playing, think Caitlyn Jenner on Hannity or Kanye with a White Lives Matter tee, become defunct. They need this to be a game about individuals to distract from what's really killing us. It's why I don't reference hate all that often. It certainly exists, but I don't have the time to worry about what's in your heart, much less prove it. This is not a conversation about feelings, it's a conversation about power, its means and its ends. Nobody should give a damn that this shooter suddenly decided that they're non-binary. I don't care about these stupid arguments about, oh, well, you made the rules. You say that just because somebody says they're a woman, that makes them a woman. So obviously in this case, if somebody says they're a non-binary person, then obviously non-binary. Yeah, sure, I don't care. I didn't ask. I don't care. It's still clearly motivated by hate by literally everything we've talked about in this video, and it's a bullshit argument that they're using to provide cover for a shooter and hopefully provide cover for themselves because they understand the implications and maybe even help him get away with not getting hate crime charges. That's it. That's all you need to know.